We've been on this winter Kyolche series of Dharma talks, and in a way, I feel like I've been on vacation. So it's a little bit of getting back to work, coming here tonight and giving this Dharma talk. And this Dharma talk is going to be a little bit meandering. I've got a couple of things I want to cover. And really, I have to start by just pointing to the language that I'm using. I have, I want, I will. Marshall said in his pre-introduction, no matter how good I feel, technology will bring me down. And that's the two teachers who are on this call. How about the rest of you? How much do we reference ourselves? I was thinking during meditation of the George Harrison song, I, Me, Mine. All through the days, I, me, mine, I, me, mine, I, me, mine. Really, our Zen practice is dealing with this problem of I. We dance around this question. We use what sounds almost like a mantra or an object of meditation. We ask, what am I? But that question is not really a mantra. That question is a tool to dig in. If you want to practice Zen, we have to challenge our assumptions of I. If we don't do that, then we can try to improve our lives and we can use this practice to be helpful. So you don't actually have to go the full extent of practice, which really is to bring great doubt to this question of I. Not just to use it as a phrase, what am I? But actively, in the moment of our daily life, there are so many opportunities to wonder, who am I referring to? We're constantly self-referencing. How am I in relationship with this? This is happening. How do I feel about it? We're constantly in this bind where our thoughts and feelings create this sense of there being a permanent abiding self. And Buddhism tackles this point. The more we believe in this permanent abiding self, the more we suffer. Because the more we're trying to control and make things better for me, and that often actually means worse for you, we're in this conflict with reality. And that self-centered perspective actually makes things worse, not better. I heard one teacher refer to this problem as the problem of self-referencing. We're always referencing our reality towards, how is it for me? How am I right now? What am I doing right now? Why are they acting this way towards me? What did I do? Who is that I? Again, it's not just a phrase to be repeated. It's a really deep question. How does it show up in your life? How do we bring this question alive? This afternoon, there's my I again, it can't be helped. When we use language, I've been told that in the Chinese language, there are no pronouns. So it's a little bit easier to not get stuck, but our language is focused on self. So that's the conditioning that we start off with. So this afternoon, my last appointment of the day was a little challenging. And then that ended, and I had my feelings about it. And in that moment, there's also the question, really? Did what happened, say this, is what happened what I think happened? Because I is actually a perspective. I used to say, I haven't said it in a while, that I is almost like a pair of sunglasses that we put on. And each one of us has our own perspective, our own pair of sunglasses that we take in all the information through. So we think we're being objective, but we're always coloring. We're always shaping. If you notice and watch your thinking, or I'll say it personally for this being over here, as I watch thinking and feeling, I notice it's mostly commentary about what's happening. Uh-oh, this is happening. I better do this. Why is that person doing that? That's ridiculous. How could they possibly do that? Or, wow, how did I see that? How did they do that? I could never see that. We think of ourselves as this fixed object. We lose sight of the fact that we are actually part of the entirety of what's going on. Our eyes, we see the world going outward. We think I'm here and everything is there. Back in the early 1980s, while I was living at Empty Gate Zen Center, this man named Douglas Harding was invited, and he came and gave a Dharma talk or a talk. He wasn't a Zen teacher, but he had these books that he had written. And one of the books was called On Having No Head. Think about it for a second. We don't see our head. How do you know you have a head? Yeah, we're all looking in a screen and we see this reflection back at us. But as we live our lives, we don't really have a head. We just perceive outward. So already our assumptions are suspect. You've all heard me talk about this a lot, challenging one's assumptions. What do we assume in this moment? What is it that should be happening? And what is it that's not quite happening the way it should be? And how do I feel about that? It's all self-referential. So another strand I want to weave in here is that today is April 12th. In our Western, or on our Western calendar, April 8th, we call Buddha's birthday. So we celebrate this day of Buddha's birth. And when we hear, I know when I hear that, and I'm imagining when you hear that, you think of the birth of this incarnation that we call Buddha, but a human male being who was born on a particular day. But even there, it's suspect because, first of all, they used a lunar calendar, not the Western calendar in the time that Buddha was alive. So he certainly was not born on April 8th, because in the lunar calendar, when you translate it to the Western calendar, it shifts around. So it's not April 8th. That's already a fabrication. And in one documentary I saw about the Buddha, until the mid-1800s, there was a lot of doubt whether the Buddha actually existed at all. That perhaps the idea of Buddha was just a mythological figure. We don't know. This not knowing, you always hear it. This not knowing starts to cut through the problem. Because once we realize we don't know, suddenly the assumptions are a little looser. We don't hold them quite as tight. So when Zen Master Matsu was asked, what is Buddha? He said, Buddha is mind. So was mind born on April 8th, 2,600 years ago or so? And before that time, there was no mind? Ridiculous. We've been told, and I trust this science, I suppose, we've been told at least that in about 7 years' time, all the cells in our body, maybe not including our brain, I'm not sure, but generally speaking, the cells in our bodies are always changing. So even the body that we had 7 years ago is not the same body we have now. If somebody cuts off this pinky, what happens to eye? Somebody cuts off this arm, what happens to eye? If emotions change, what happens to eye? In actual fact, eye is in constant motion. In very traditional basic Buddhism, one of the issues that Buddha raised was that there is no abiding self. So in Theravadan Buddhism, you're discussing or you're working with what we call no self. If it's no self, then where does the I come from? In the morning bell chant, it says something like moment to moment events happen like beads on a string, except the string is emptiness. There is no string. Mind creates the longevity. Last week, Tim Lurch, Gino Popesanim, gave us this wonderful talk, and he had this wonderful phrase, the arc of practice. That implies it's my practice. I have a practice, and my practice has gone like this. That's a fabrication. That's a myth that actually helps to sustain our self-view. These days we have the James Webb telescope. We see these amazing pictures of the immensity of this universe. And what we're told is we come directly from the stardust. The explosions of stars creates these elements that float through space. And somehow they found the right environment here on Earth. And first one-cell animals appeared, plants appeared, and over long time of evolution, these human beings have appeared. And we human beings are the only animal that deals with the understanding that we die. So we have a life and we know we're going to die. And we string together all of these experiences, feelings, ideas, beliefs, impulses, consciousness, all of it. We string together and we create a narrative that we think is I. When I was training to be a psychotherapist, there came onto the scene a kind of psychotherapy called narrative therapy. And what it was meant to do, as far as I understood it, it probably was a little bit deeper than I'm about to say, but basically we look at the narrative of self and we recognize the errors that are in it. I am this. I have an older brother, and sometimes I'll talk to him about memories that I have about our childhood. And one time I remember specifically, I was talking to him about a very rich emotional memory. And at the end of my share, he said, "That wasn't you, that was me." And I was 5 years old. He was 8 years old. most likely he knows better than I do. Those 3 years are pretty important years. And yet, it's still mine. I can't give it to him. Truth doesn't really matter. What matters is what we feel. And it's our conditioning and the way we piece our experience together creates how we feel about something. You know, some of us are introverts, some of us are extroverts. And of course, that's a continuum. So we're all on different places on that continuum. And we would say, I am naturally this way. But if you can be more extroverted than me, you and I are the same. The only difference is our conditioning. Even our physical condition, our bodies are different. But it's if we return to don't know, it's all one thing. There's no separation. Nothing is ever separate. So to say I separate from you breaks apart the whole universe into pieces. Where do I begin and you end? What about the space between us? Now, let's see. Vivian's in Montreal, Canada. That might be as far. Well, James, his picture's not on, but he's in Thailand. We're thousands and thousands and thousands of miles apart. And yet it feels like we're together. What am I? What is real? And what I'm suggesting here is this question, this challenging of our assumptions about reality need to happen daily, hourly, always in our mind. What am I? That's not just a word phrase to bring us back to calmness or back to a base level. It's an actual question to bring to the moment. When you're mad at me, who are you? What's going on? Where does that anger arise from? And how do you know you're right? We call this great doubt. And it's so easy to forget great doubt and to believe our narrative about ourselves. When we're in the midst of our daily life, that question, what am I, arises, that challenges the whole fabric of how I'm perceiving and interacting with the world around me. And like I said, we can use meditation for calmness. We can use almost everything that's part of our practice as a way of being calmer, being more emotionally connected, being more able to be with other people. And that's a wonderful thing. And we have this amazing opportunity as Zen practitioners to go deeper, to challenge the deep conditioning that binds us. Marshall used this phrase in his Dharma speech after Inca, and he pointed to the temple rules and the line that says, if we can break the walls of self, we are already infinite in time and space. And because our language is so focused on with pronouns, I think it's helpful to change that just a little bit. When the walls of self disappear, already infinite in time and space. In fact, even with the walls of self, we're already infinite in time and space because the walls of self are built by the conditioning that happens. And it starts, I don't even know when. It probably started with the Big Bang, and I don't know what happened before that. But in utero, we're buffeted around by things that are happening by our mother. The karma of our DNA appears at conception. And the conditioning begins. By the time we're aware of our thinking, we already have an idea, I am me. But we don't really know. We use this language, I'm like this, I'm naturally this way. How do we know that? This may be the way we always behave, but is it natural? Or is it a defensive creation created by our infant self in order to survive situations? All of us experience trauma. All of us are shaped by the trauma we've experienced. That's the human world. That's not bad or good. That's just the way it is. Some of us have more trauma. Some of us have less trauma by virtue of the conditions that we are born into. We didn't do anything. If we're born into a violent, addiction-prone situation, we didn't do anything, but we're buffeted by what we're dealt with, what we have to deal with. And the dealing with things creates I. So now we're all adults here on this Zoom meeting, and we have this long narrative that we've pieced together, and we believe that's who we are. But ask your partner, is that really who they are? Who we are? Ask your mother, is that really who you are? I remember telling my mother stories about myself, and she looked at me like, it didn't happen that way. This is just a touch different, but my father always, there would be a reason I'd have to go into his underwear drawer. And he had the most well-folded underwear I could imagine. So throughout my whole life, I thought my father must be a little obsessive compulsive. I mean, who would fold underwear like that? I once said that to my mother, and she looked at me and she said, who do you think folded his underwear? Well, I never even thought of that. And that one fact changes everything. So what facts are you leaving out? What facts have you created out of your impressions that wasn't actually true, but you've based so much of your life on those facts? We are not who we think we are. And that's really the beginning point of deep Zen practice. So I'll just finish up here. Always happens, I have to leave things out. But as I was thinking about this talk, I'm always reminded of just the incredibly wise and deep statement by Dogen, the founder really of at least the Japanese Soto school of Zen. And Dogen was a real philosopher. And Dogen is credited as saying something to the effect of, to study Buddhism is to study self. To study self is to forget self. To forget self is to be enlightened by the myriad things or the 10,000 things. That's the path of Zen. To study the self, we use this amazing tool of great doubt. You read the Heart Sutra, we chant the Heart Sutra in this, know that, know this, know that. There's a million ideas of why the Heart Sutra is written that way. But taking that deep know, really in Chinese, it's wu. Japanese call it mu. It doesn't actually mean no. It's a little bit closer to without. So what am I without my narrative? Who am I if I forget who I am? I'm not talking about some psychological problem or some physical problem. You know, it's very tricky because we live in a both-and world. There was a Buddhist psychologist, I believe his name was Charles Tart, in the 1970s, and he was a Vipassana practitioner. And he said, in order to let go of self, we need to have a strong self. That unless we have a sense of solidity, letting go of self is just a way of bypassing the emotional and spiritual problems that we have. We have to deal with the reality of our situation. If we've been beaten up and beaten down our whole life, to just say, well, there's no self anyway, so what difference does it make, denies a lot of important realities. So I'm not suggesting denial of conditions. But what I'm saying is to use this amazing tool of not knowing, of great doubt, to wonder, to put another little checkpoint. Really? Are you sure? How do you know that? Who told you that? Every morning I clean out the coffee pot. It's one of my jobs at home. And every morning I remember, I used to live on this commune. And the guy he and his wife owned the commune. I think it was his family money that was able to buy the land. He once told me that coffee grounds are great for cleaning your drain. So it's really good to have coffee grounds in the sink. Every morning I think of that. And one morning I thought, really? He was not so wise. Really, is that true? So I decided to look it up. And this isn't Dr. Google, but Google helped me out to find out that, yeah, that's kind of an old wives' tale. And coffee grounds can actually clog up your sink. But I was 21, 22, 23 years old. I was living a life outside of my conditioning, and I was growing and changing, and I was open. And he told me this, and it went in, and I just believed it. It's not a big deal. I mean, unless my sink clogs up, and then I've got to deal with that. But it's just a small example of the fiction that we live under. What am I is not a meditation tool. What am I is a deep practice that we use moment to moment to wake up. And when we say Buddha was born on April 8th, actually, Buddha is born on April 12th at, if you're in the Pacific time zone, at 8:14 p.m. Right now, Buddha is born. And if we can let go of the trap and the prison, really, of I, then we can experience that birth moment to moment. When we forget ourself or forget self, then it's not all self-referencing. Then it's responding to conditions as they arise and being alive. Being Buddha means being alive. It doesn't mean being good. It doesn't mean being bad. It means this moment waking up. And if we follow Dogen's prescription, to study Buddhism is to study ourselves. What am I? To study self is to forget the self. If there's no I right now, then what? To be enlightened by the myriad things. Each moment wakes us up. We are the moment. Once we cut out the legs of I, the moment appears. And yes, we're there. And part of the whole ecosystem, not just my tiny little fantasy that I create in my mind.